Hey guys, so it occurred to me that we never really did an introduction to philosophy of language, and we talked about the history of it, but we didn't really make note of how it came around in terms of what theories existed before it. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to do that for you guys, to provide some more context. When we're recording live conversations about philosophy, it's really beneficial because it gives us a chance to have an exchange and get different perspectives on the text. But it also means that we're speaking to two different audiences, and it's not always obvious what we should expect people to know. So I think maybe we need to do a little background so you guys understand what philosophy of language itself is all about before we launch into the Frege reading. So we're going to do that now. We're looking at a philosophy of language textbook that I have. Um, I can give you the title, but I can't upload it. Uh, this one would be a problem for me to upload and give to you guys. So I can give you the information and maybe you can find it yourself if you're really curious and interested in philosophy of language. But otherwise, just take screenshots or go with what we have here. I can probably copy and paste any text if anybody wants me to do that specifically. Email me about it. Okay, so let's get started. We have meaning and understanding. So we start out with this interesting claim. Not many people know that in 1931, Adolf Hitler made a visit to the United States and in the course of which he did some sightseeing, had a brief affair with a lady named Maxine in Keokuk, Iowa, tried peyote, which caused him to hallucinate hordes of frogs and toads wearing little boots and singing Horsvithslied. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Infiltrated a munitions plant near Detroit, met secretly with Vice President Curtis regarding sealskin futures, and invented the electric can opener. There's a very good reason why not many people know all that. None of it is true. But the remarkable thing is that just now you read through my opening sentence, let's call it sentence one, and you understood it perfectly, whether or not you were ready to accept it. And you did so without the slightest conscious effort. So, the philosopher Kane Baker and I did do this at the beginning of our video lecture. Kane constructed a sentence about David Bowie living on the moon and eating tomatoes and drinking tea. This is no different to that, but I don't know that he and I really explored what's remarkable about this. So I want to do that now. Remarkable, I said. It probably does not strike you as remarkable or surprising even now that you've noticed it. You're entirely used to reading words and sentences and understanding them at sight, and you find it nearly as natural as breathing or eating or walking. But how did you understand sentence one? So this is the beginning of what philosophy of language is all about, right? You haven't seen it before. The author is certain that never in the history of the universe has anyone ever written or uttered that particular sentence until he did so just now. And hopefully this is your first time encountering it. If you've encountered the sentence in philosophy of language before, I don't know why you're taking a 101 class. So, nor did you understand sentence one by having ever seen a very similar sentence, since I doubt that anyone has ever produced a sentence even remotely similar to sentence one. So, our author, whose name is Lichen, Liken's going to want to say, you may say that you understood sentence one because you speak English, and sentence one is an English sentence. That is true, right? That is true so far as it goes, but it only pushes the mystery to arm's length. How is it that you are able to speak English, given that speaking English involves being able to produce and understand not only elementary expressions like I am thirsty, shut up, and more gravy, but novel? So I'm sure we all know now that novel means new. Novel sentences as complex as sentence number one. And that's a really complex sentence, right? It looked like a whole paragraph. And Lycan's going to point out here that ability is truly amazing and much harder to explain than how you breathe or how you eat or how you walk. each of which abilities is already well understood by physiologists. You might disagree, and this is where philosophy of language also overlaps with philosophy of mind a little bit. The how in this sentence is a physical explanation. And if you watched our video on Nagel, we'll see that philosophy of mind is not interested so much in physical explanations. So this is a claim that we physically understand how that happens, not that we understand, the mind and how the mind commands these physical processes, other than physically. So one clue is fairly obvious upon reflection. Sentence one is a string of words, English words, that you understand individually. So that might be your inclination upon reflecting on that sentence. So it seems that you understand sentence one because you understand the words that occur in sentence one and you understand something about how they are strung together. So if that's your inclination, we're going to see as we move through philosophy of language briefly here that it's an important fact, but it doesn't really tell us anything. So why is it only suggestive? I'm going to skip a bit here. And this textbook is going to ask us to consider linguistic expressions themselves as objects of study in their own right. So what does that mean? Let's look at these. We have W space G F J S K H I space blah blah blah, right? As sentence number 2. For sentence number 3, we have it is dangerous to splash gasoline around your living room, full stop. And for sentence 4, we have good of off primely the y, full stop. So the textbook notes sentences 1 through 4 are all strings of marks or noises if uttered aloud, right? They're on the paper. If you're looking at it, there's strings of marks, and then I uttered those noises aloud. But they differ dramatically from each other. Sentence 1, that's the sentence about Hitler visiting America, and sentence 3, it's going to be, maybe one day I can highlight this, are meaningful sentences, while 2 and 4 are gibberish. 4 differs from 2 in containing individually meaningful English words, but the words are not linked together in any such a way as to make a sentence, and collectively they do not mean anything at all. So we're going to make some language facts. This can tell us a lot. It can tell us that some strings of marks or noises are meaningful sentences. Each meaningful sentence has parts that are themselves meaningful, right? We have, with sentence number 4, we have a sentence that has individual parts that are meaningful. We know what good means. Of is a preposition, but we have some kind of idea of what it means. Off, we have an idea of what that means, right? So the parts themselves are meaningful. You might be able to think of some compound words, or even just some words that contain multiple meanings. So an example philosophers of language like to use is if I say doe. That contains both the fact that it is a deer, that is the species we are talking about, and the fact that it is female. The same is going to apply to the word woman. So that contains the fact that this is a human being and that that human being is female. Same with man, right? That's going to contain the fact that this is a human being and that that human being is male. Right? They can contain lots of meaningful information. So each meaningful sentence means something in particular. Nope, not scrolling down. And then we have our last language fact, or this bit of data that inspires philosophy of language. Competent speakers of a language are able to understand many of the language's sentences without effort and almost instantaneously. They also produce sentences in the same way. And all these data, it's awkward to me, they're using data as a mass noun. If that's grammatically awkward for you, there's debate going on about whether or not that's okay. All these data all need explaining. In virtue of what is any sequence of marks or noises meaningful, right? When they say in virtue of what, they mean what property? How is it that any sequence of marks or noises gets meaning? What property is it? How does that happen? In virtue of what does such a in virtue of what does such a string mean what it distinctively does? Right? Why does that sentence mean what it means? Why does that utterance mean what it means? And how, again, are human beings able to understand and produce appropriate, meaningful speech? Again, it's not enough just to say that we all speak English, right? And that we understand. These are kind of little pre-puzzles. These are just observations that we need to be able to account for. So this is what I really want us to pay attention to in this little prolegomena, in this little preface to our reading of the Frege text, the referential theory. So the textbook's going to point out there's an attractive and commonsensical explanation of all the foregoing facts, all those facts we talked about up there. So attractive that most of us think it by the time we are 10 or 11 years old. This is what I'm calling a naive theory of language. I call it this in our assignment, and I call it this in the Frege reading. The idea is that linguistic expressions have the meanings they do because they stand for things. So standing for things. They reference things. And then we see a semicolon, which means they're going to elaborate or restate. What they mean is what they stand for. On this view, words are like labels. They are symbols that represent, designate, name, denote, or refer to items in the world. The name Adolf Hitler denotes the person, Hitler. The noun dog refers to dogs, as do the French Chine and the German Hund. My goofy pronunciations. The sentence, "The cat sat on the mat," represents some cats sitting on some mat, presumably in virtue of the cat designating that cat, like a particular cat in front of you, and the mat designating the mat in question, and sat denoting, if you like, they're just using a different word here, the relation of sitting on. Right? So under this theory, sentences thus mirror the states of affairs they describe, and that's how they get to mean those things, or how they came to mean those things. Right? This is a very simple articulation of referential theories. And this is what people had before Frege came along. This was our understanding of language. Probably this is your understanding of how words get meaning, how they come to mean things. The textbook's going to go on. For the most part, of course, words are arbitrarily associated with the things. This is just to say that, instead of saying cat, right, with a k-at sound, we could have said like plumbus, right? And that could then represent that furry little animal. We could have said flobbly flop. And that could have meant that furry little animal that's sitting on the mat, right? It's arbitrary. It could have been anything, right? We understand this. And again, in other languages, they mean different things, or they are different series of sounds or letters strung together. So they're going to elaborate here. Someone simply decided that Hitler was to be called Adolf, and the inscription, right, the written form, or sound dog could have been used to mean anything. Nobody disagrees with this. No theories disagree with this. No theories are going to say words had to be the specific sounds or arrangement of letters that they are. So this is going to hold true continually. We all understand that they're arbitrary. This is what this, of course, is for. So this referential theory of linguistic meaning would explain the significance of all expressions in terms of their having been conventionally associated with things or states of affairs in the world, right? They reference something in the world. And it would explain a human being's understanding a a sentence in terms of that person's knowing what the sentence component words refer to. I'm really sorry if I'm doing a terrible job reading. I'm wearing glasses today instead of contacts because my allergies are so bad. So I apologize, but I realized it was very important that we review this. So anyway, this does explain something, right? I'm trying to get the little underline feature to pop up. It's not doing it. Oh well. Maybe add note. No, we don't want to do that. Okay. So it works. The referential theory works for certain things. It works for all those things we noticed up above. What is not going to work for is the four puzzles Frege and Russell discovered. And I say discovered, not created, because presumably these were always problems with the referential linguistic theory of meaning, but it took Frege and Russell to discover them. Right? The textbook is going to finish by saying it is a natural and appealing view. Indeed, it may seem obviously correct, at least so far as it goes. And one would have a hard time denying that reference or naming is our cleanest cut and most familiar relation between a word and the world. Yet, when examined, the referential theory very soon runs into serious objection. Now, the textbook is going to effectively do here what Kane and I discuss in the video, right? So it's going to raise them as objections instead of puzzles, right? So it's going to point out that not every word does name or denote any actual objects, right? What about the sentence, I saw nobody, right? Or as they point out here, right? First, there are names of non-existent items like Pegasus or the Easter Bunny. We talk about Clark Kent and Superman a good deal in the Frege reading. Pegasus does not denote anything because there is in reality no winged horse for it to denote. We stick to the language of reference in Frege's reading, but denote and reference mean the same thing. There's nothing for it to point to in the world, right? So what about pronouns like I and nobody? I saw nobody. This is going to be a problem, and it would be a tired joke to take nobody as a name and respond, you must have very good eyesight then, right? They're treating nobody as though it's somebody's name. I saw nobody would be like saying, I saw Frank, right? So it's just a funny joke about language. Okay, so, right, this is a excerpt from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. Who did you pass on the road? Nobody. So, of course, nobody walks slower than you. Lewis Carroll, interestingly, was a logician in addition to being an author of children's books. He worked on logic and language puzzles. So this is an integration of this kind of logical reasoning into Alice in Wonderland. It's fantastic. Anyway, let's move on. Second, consider a simple subject-predicate sentence. Ralph is fat. Sorry about the body shaming in the textbook, but I find it helpful to have this visually on the page. Though Ralph may name a person, what does fat name or denote? Not an individual. Certainly it does not name Ralph, but it describes or characterizes him fairly or not, right? It doesn't really matter. We might suggest that fat denotes something abstract. For example, it and other adjectives might be said to refer to qualities or properties or attributes or features or characteristics or the like. fat might be said to name fatness in the abstract, or as Plato would have called it, the fat itself. Plato believed in something called the realm of the forms, where he thought all things got their perfect form from. So he would have thought there was a realm that contained the fat itself. This is why I don't talk about Plato a lot, because that seems quite silly, and I am not messing up the explanation. That's what it is. So perhaps what sentence 6, Ralph is fat, says is that Ralph has or exemplifies or is an instance of the quality fatness. On that interpretation, is fat would mean has fatness. But then if we try to think of the subject predicate meaning as a matter of conjugating the name of a property with the name of an individual using the cupola is, this gets crazy, you guys, we would need a second abstract entity for the is to stand for, say, the relation of having. Essentially, and if you want to read this, I would recommend you pause it now. I can scroll down a bit so you can read all of this. This is not one of the language puzzles we're going to really deal with. This is not a philosophy of language class, but suffice to say, this has some difficulty in parsing, and yet we all understand what it means. So if words just refer, it's not clear what is fat is referring to in this sentence. Is it referring to the realm of the forms, fatness itself? Do these words actually stand for something else? Does it mean Ralph bears the having relation to fatness, right? So you just end up creating infinite abstract entities to try to show relations to the original individual. Because is fat doesn't stand for anything, because reference theory of meaning is incorrect or incomplete. We need something else. So I'm going to skip through all of this, but I'll pause briefly so you can take a screenshot if you do want to read that. I was originally extremely compelled by philosophy of language, and it is why I went to graduate school. So if you're having some feels about this and you're like, oh, I like puzzles, this is interesting, or I like grammar, or I like writing, take a screenshot of this and keep reading. And if you email me individually, I can send you all of this. Okay. So objection number 2, according to the referential theory, a sentence is a list of names, right? Ball references that round sphere, dog references, the little barky animal, or like the big barky animal that people keep in their houses sometimes, so on and so forth, right? So because they reference things, they're not proper nouns. They're not names in the sense that my name is Cole. They're just names of things. They reference things, right? But a mere list of names does not say anything. Fred, Martha, Irving, Phyllis, right? Cannot be used to assert anything, even if Martha or Irving is an abstract entity rather than a physical object. So like if Martha was replaced with red, I should have probably said blue because this is going to get difficult to read. This would read Fred, Blue, Irving, Phyllis. It still doesn't say anything, right? So that would be an abstract entity. A color might be an example of that. One might suppose that if the name of an individual is consecrated with the name of a quality, as in Ralph Fatness, the resulting string would have normal subject-predicate meaning, say that Ralph is fat. Right? And Bertrand Russell suggests this, but we're not doing that much of a deep dive into philosophy of language. So again, this is just a second objection. Maybe I should pause it so I can get to the objections I really want to talk about. I'm going to do that. Be back in a second, guys. Okay, and we're back. That was a lot of scrolling. So this book doesn't focus on particular philosophers, but rather focuses on building a theory out of referential theory. So from those objections, we can clearly see that referential theory of meaning does not hold for all words, But some people are going to say it says one might think it would apply at least to singular terms, right? Terms that purport, which just means like claim, to refer to single individuals, such as proper names, pronouns, and definite descriptions. And here we have Gottlieb Frege and Bertrand Russell, both of whom we talk about in this section. This is their first appearance in this textbook. They argued powerfully that definite descriptions, at least, do not mean what they mean in virtue of denoting what they denote. Rather, we don't know which he, I guess that would be Bertrand Russell. Yes, this is Bertrand Russell. Rather, Bertrand Russell contended a sentence containing a definite description, such as the woman who lives there is a biochemist, has subject-predicate form only superficially and is really logically a trio of generalizations. It's equivalent to at least one woman lives there, so that's the first in the trio, and at most one woman lives there, that's the second of the trio, and whoever lives there is a biochemist, that's the third of the trio. So Bertrand Russell thought all of this was these claims, right, which can be true or false, which makes them truth functional, they all reside in this one sentence. He's going to claim some other things were loaded into that sentence too. So I want to move past this and get to the actual puzzles. I think we have a good enough idea of what philosophy of language is trying to do now. It's trying to fix referential theory of meaning, and I didn't really like the way that Kane typed up these problems. He didn't include their logical forms, and you guys seem to really enjoy when I do logic, so it makes more sense of it. So we're going to look at some of these in logical form again, the more difficult ones. So this textbook is calling it the problem of apparent reference to non-existence. Non-existence here is a noun. It sounds like I'm saying like the property of non-existence, but you'll see if based on the spelling, it's non-existent that's been pluralized. So non-existent things, you can say if you want, to get an obvious noun in there, but non-existent things. So James Moriarty, this is a character in Sherlock Holmes, is bald. So we typed out a sentence very similar to this, making a claim about Harry Potter or a claim about Superman or something like that. So they explain who he is, who Moriarty is. So we've got this sentence. We're referencing something that doesn't exist. In this case, James Moriarty, Sherlock Holmes' archenemy. So the following set of statements is inconsistent. That is, on pain of logical contradiction, the statements cannot all be true. On pain of just means like if all these were true, you'd have a logical contradiction, which is something like a mathematical paradox. It tells us that something is wrong. So we're going to analyze this sentence now. I'm going to scroll down a little bit and look at these assertions. So this sentence is meaningful. Okay, we can agree to that. James Moriarty is bald. It is a subject-predicate sentence. Okay, it has subject, predicate, right? With this is in the middle. A meaningful subject-predicate sentence is meaningful only in virtue of it picking out some individual thing and ascribing some property to that thing, right? You have to have a subject in the sentence. In the sentence is James Moriarty, and it has to pick out some individual thing, or it has to pick out some individual thing. So check, we've got that. The thing it's picking out is James Moriarty, and the property it's ascribing to it is baldness. So sentence number one's subject term fails to pick out or denote anything that exists. This is why it's a problem. So we now just look at the rules we already have and put them together with this fact, right? So if sentence one is meaningful only in virtue of picking out a thing and ascribing a property to that thing from when they're in parentheses like this, It means that we got that information from combining all three of these. And if sentence 1's subject term fails to pick out anything that exists, which we got from J4, as you can see clearly here, then either sentence 1 is not meaningful after all, which is a contradiction of J1, right? It is meaningful, or it picks out a thing that does not exist. But there is no such thing as a non-existent thing. So that's the walkthrough of why it's a problem. They'll elaborate a little more. Let's go on. The rub is that every one of these claims, J1 through J6, seems true. But it contains a contradiction, a logical contradiction, which is a paradox. Something cannot be both true and false at the same time. And you might be thinking like, oh, well, it could be half true, right? Well, we just pick out the half that's true and say that's entirely true, and it's entirely false. But we can't do that here. Also, logic has the property of being bivalent, which means it only has two settings. It's either true or false, right? If I say the cup is on the table, either the cup is on the table or the cup is not on the table at any given moment. The cup can't be both on the table and not on the table. It could be a little bit on the table, but it would still be on the table. So that's a property of logical reasoning. So now they give us the special case, which Kane and I also discuss. Why is it like this? Why? The problem of negative existentials, right? So we talk about this, but again, I prefer the way the textbook has written it out, so I want you to take a second with it. So we're going to consider the sentence, Pegasus never existed, which actually is a sentence that we review in the Frege reading. So sentence 2, Pegasus never existed, seems to be true and seems to be about, I don't know how to say this Greek god, Belpheron's steed, Pegasus, right? That's just some Greek mythology. But if sentence 2 is true, sentence 2 cannot be about Pegasus because there is no such entity for it to be about. It can't refer to anything. Likewise, if 2 is about Pegasus, then 2 is false, for Pegasus must then be in it for something to exist. So this is what I really want to focus on in this video, and I know it's a lot of work to get here, but this is quite difficult to understand without looking at it in some kind of parsed out form. So I'm going to pause the video and scroll to that, and we'll resume our conversation then. Okay, so we're looking at our sentence, Pegasus does not exist. And again, you guys seemed to really benefit from putting things in logical form. So let's try to put this in logical form. The first thing to do is to pick out the component parts of the sentence. Now, Bertrand Russell noticed something. This sentence, or a sentence like it, let's say, let's use my name. Paul Nasrallah teaches philosophy, right? We know that this is, well, we know that this is true. So let's figure out how we did this. So Bertrand Russell is going to say that this sentence has parts to it. The first part is something like the claim, there exists a person such that this person is whole Nasrallah. Right? Basically just I exist. The reason the language is strange here is because when we put this in logical form, it's an existence claim. and this is the best way to read it. We might get into that a little bit more, but just forgive the strange structure. If you end up doing any complex math or studying philosophy, then this will be useful to you to keep the structure somewhat similar to this. So, and the second claim is, well, I don't know if I want to break it up. This person teaches, right? I'm going to relabel these actually. I'm going to label this one P and this one Q. In philosophy, we usually label things this way. So these are our claims. So now the sentence, Cole Nasrallah teaches philosophy, gets turned into a logical equation, P and Q. So in English, I should capitalize that, apparently. In English, this sentence would read as, there exists a person such that this person is Cole Nasrallah, and this person teaches philosophy. Okay, but what I really want to focus on is this P and Q. So, and is a connective in logic. We talked about truth tables a bit, so you guys should understand this, right? There are truth conditions. What does it take for a claim like this, a P and Q claim, to be true? So if I say I have pennies and quarters in my pocket, and I do have pennies, but I don't have quarters, the sentence P and Q is what? It's a lie. It's going to say false, right? Same way the other way around. If I don't have pennies in my pocket, but I do have quarters in my pocket, it's going to be false. So we call this a conjunction. This I think I gave you this thing's name. It's called the conjunction. Hopefully that's in your notes. So in order for, that's not for, a conjunction to be true, both parts have to be true. You probably knew this, right? If somebody promises to throw a party and provide snacks, and you come to the party and you're hungry because you didn't want to eat and there are no snacks, they've lied to you, right? Or if they promise to throw a party and have snacks and they just buy themselves a bunch of snacks and don't have a party, they've lied to you. Like you took your Saturday off, you're going to go to their party. That didn't happen. So both parts have to be true. And if they don't have a party and they don't have snacks, right? If both parts are false, it's still false. They have obviously lied to you, right? So now let's analyze Pegasus does not exist logically. So our first bit, our P bit, is going to be there exists an entity such that this entity is Pegasus, right? Exactly the same as up here. There exists a person such that this person is Cole Nasrallah. There exists an entity such that this entity is Pegasus. And we've got our Q, which is this entity does not exist. Sorry about that pause there. I was thinking about naming it again. This entity, Pegasus, does not exist, right? So we put this together into our P and Q form. I'm going to do something kind of strange, guys. Imagine how I'm going to do logic exams online. I have no idea because they have to write all this stuff out. So we've got our initial claim, right? P. Let's give that the value of true. And let's give Q the value of false, right? So there exists an entity such that this entity is Pegasus. Okay, let's say that's true. This entity does not exist. Well, our claim, Pegasus does not exist, turns into P and Q, and we'll see that both parts need to be true, right? And if this seems overly complex, well, let's go down one more. Let's change the values. Let's say there exists an entity such that this entity is Pegasus, which we know is false. Pegasus doesn't exist in the real world. And then let's give Q, this entity does not exist, the value of true. This aligns better with our understanding of the world. Well, in order for a conjunction to be true, both parts have to be true. But that can't happen. Why can't that happen? Because it contains a contradiction. It's right there. This says that Pegasus exists, and this very clearly says that Pegasus does not exist. And we arrive at a contradiction. So Bertrand Russell is going to say that in order to make these kinds of utterances, we first have to assert the existence of the subject of it. Right? Cole Nasrallah teaches philosophy. Implicit in that is the fact that this person exists. I couldn't teach philosophy if I didn't exist. So you're asserting my existence by saying my name and by saying there are true facts about me, right? So this sentence is fine. We know it's true. But if you substitute this with, right? We're going to pretty quickly see that we can't get past this first bit. There exists a person such that this person is Harry Potter, and Harry Potter teaches philosophy. Well, that's just not true, because Harry Potter doesn't exist. Harry Potter cannot possibly teach philosophy because he doesn't exist. He would have to first exist in order to teach philosophy. So to move back to the textbook, we're just going to go over this a bit more. This is the problem of negative existentials. When we're referring to things that don't exist in the world, we fail at the first step because there's nothing to refer to. There's nothing for this term to pick out in the world. If referential theory were true, if we learned meanings of words by picking things out that were associated with them, or by, describing them, then we would have nothing to point to reference for Harry Potter. So we can't make the claim Pegasus does not exist. Actually, let me go back for a second. We don't want this to equal true anymore. Maybe you're fine with this. Maybe you're fine with this equaling false. My caps lock is on. Maybe you're fine with this equaling false. Because you're like, well, Harry Potter doesn't teach philosophy. And there does not exist a person such as Harry Potter. And you're like, okay, I don't see what the problem is. Then what you need to do is move on to the problem of negative existentials. When you want to be able to say something like Pegasus doesn't exist or Harry Potter doesn't exist, it appears that in order to refer to anything, in order for the sentence to be meaningful, these terms have to point to something. But what do they point to? They don't point to anything. So how does this mean anything? How is this a comprehensible sentence? Now we know it's going to equal. This is also going to equal because of what I showed you down here, right? And we know that's not true either, right? We want to be able to say Harry Potter does not exist and have that equal true. But because of our understanding of language, because you have to first point to something in the world in order to say something about it, you have to first assert the existence of something in order to say something about it. It looks like we can never get these to be true because you have to assert the existence and then make the claim. And both of those have to be true in order for your claim to be true. These sorts of statements are always going to equal false. And that's not right. Our theory, this oh wow. Guys, my nails have gotten super long over break. I don't want to call it break, but over teaching from home. Sorry about that. So this means our theory of language is wrong or incomplete. When your theory of language, like if math was telling you that 2 plus 2 equaled 40, well, maybe let's not do 40. Let's say 2 plus 2 equaled 360. Then that would mean that your math was either wrong or incomplete. You need to add more to it or just go back to the drawing board. Any theory that says that things are just things we pick out in the world, things we reference in the world, is flatly wrong or incomplete. Frege also is going to have a problem with this, which he explains in his sense and reference piece. This is what we're focusing on. Frege is going to try to solve this problem. Bertrand Russell is going to try to solve this problem. And to this day, philosophers of language are trying to solve this problem. How is it that Harry Potter successfully refers to anything in the world so that we can make sense out of a sentence like Harry Potter teaches philosophy, or Harry Potter, more importantly, Harry Potter does not exist? This is the goal of philosophy of language. It's not asking what words mean to you. It's not asking what different languages are. It's not asking a question about anthropology or psychology. It's asking, literally, what is going on here? And in these other puzzles. So our theory that we had throughout most of history did not work, which is to say, our theory that terms, words, just reference things in the world, doesn't work. We've demonstrated several times in this video why it doesn't work. Frege, Russell, and everyone else are going to try to solve that, and that is the work of philosophy of language. So let me pause briefly because I do want to give you guys a look at how this is spelled out in the textbook, rather than just giving you my sentences, and then we're done. So hopefully that wasn't too tedious. So actually, I looked at the textbook and it is way too complex. It uses a form of logic called quantified logic, and it's even more difficult than first order logic or predicate logic. So I think it would just confuse you guys further. But if you have any questions after watching this and the video on Frege and what philosophy of language does, or what Frege's solution to some of these problems are, right, which is what your writing assignment is about, then I hope you will message me and I can explain further. But I cannot obviously answer your questions on the assigned writing for you. But I hope you enjoyed this. This is the thing I most enjoy. It's very clear, right? And as I say in the video with Kane several times, I think the goal of philosophy is to clarify language. I think that's at least one of our major goals, and to clarify our thinking. So this helps us do that, but it does raise these interesting puzzles. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and thanks for staying tuned through what I hoped would be a short video and actually appears to be a quite lengthy lecture. I get very excited about this stuff. Thank you guys. Stay awesome. Oh, quick note, I leave the assignments open a bit longer than their due date, and I do accept late submissions. They're docked a few points. But I'd much prefer it be late than you not turn it in at all. So please notice that they do remain open a little bit past their due date. And this is to give you guys some room to work with because, you know, I'm trying to be fair. I want to reward the people who turn things in on time for being on time. And I don't want to too grievously harm or I'm not interested in punishing anyone. But mostly I want to preserve the integrity of the work of those people who did turn in the homework in the assigned amount of time. Please do not write me 600 words on this. This should not take a lot of explaining. Uh, it's fairly easy, or at least the question I ask you has a fairly easy answer. You can seriously, anyone should be able to do it within about 100 words. I want to ask you questions you can engage with, and these are pretty big problems. So the question is fairly straightforward. Don't overthink it. And everyone have a fantastic weekend.